in the final hours after 4 long months when they could have done all this work. Of course, they shoved through all the really critical stuff in the final 2 days, and they passed a $78 billion budget sent it to Bob Ferguson's desk where it awaits his approval. So here's the breakdown on what you need to know. $78 billion in spending, 8% spending growth, which is utterly insane, especially considering we spent our way from a massive surplus into a massive deficit over the course of like 5 years. They've learned nothing. And in order to pay for 8% spending growth on what all their, pet projects and ideologically charged programs, they have pushed through $9.3 billion in new taxes over the next 4 years. And you will feel this. Everyone is going to feel this. Rich, poor, middle class, businesses, workers, whatever it is. So just a few, and there are many more. They've passed through dozens of either new taxes, increased taxes, or increased fees. Just the big ones that you need to know about. B&O tax. This, I think, is going to be the most readily sort of accessible to understand the consequences of. So the B&O tax will impact businesses big and small. And also what happens when there are increased taxes for a business. Well, if that business sells goods, produces goods, whatever it is, who are they? Are they going to eat that cost? No, they're not going to eat that cost. They're going to pass it along to you. So you can expect increased costs for basically anything that you buy. Also, we know that there will be, it's only a matter of time, increased property taxes. They've just handed local school districts increased power to push through massive property tax increases to fund local school districts. So if you're living in King County and you're a sane person living in King County, buckle up, because we know the rest of the voters in Seattle are going to approve these things and you're going to pay the price for it. Increased gas tax. We already see gas prices going up dramatically because of the Climate Commitment Act. So you can add an extra 6 cents a gallon on top of that. Increased death tax rates. So for estate taxes, if you have a loved one who dies, you're going to be paying more of a increase in taxes on what they leave behind. Of course, they have increased the capital gains tax because we knew they would. They pushed it through. It survived an effort to repeal it, so they felt emboldened. So now the capital gains tax has gone up. They've pushed through a test wealth tax that's narrow in scope, and the whole intent of it is to see if they can get it to survive a legal challenge. So they're going to do this experimental narrow wealth tax because they want to tax rich people, tax them out of the state, like Jeff Bezos went running to Florida. And then we're going to have to spend millions of dollars in taxpayer funds defending it in court. So ridiculous. And then, of course, you got sales tax, Tesla tax, Discovery Pass fees went up like, 50%? I think from $30 to $45. Ridiculous. You ever been to one of our trails that the Discovery Pass funds? They look like shit. What are we paying for? What are we paying for? And you might say, well, that's why we need to spend more. No, you've had plenty of money and you still don't take care of them. So what are we even paying for? And then, of course, the reparations fee that went through that we'll talk more about in a moment. So they learned literally nothing. Literally nothing. And we're going to be right back here year after year dealing with budget deficits because a lot of these taxes are going to scare businesses and wealth out of the state. And so what happens when you pass increased taxes on the wealthy, in the form of capital gains tax, wealth tax, whatever it is, when you pass increased taxes on businesses, more businesses are going to leave, more wealthy people are going to leave. So the revenue coming in from those taxes is going to dwindle over time. And then they're going to come to you, middle class, working class people, and say, well, we're not getting as much as we thought we'd get from increased business taxes and capital gains tax. And we're not going to cut any of the programs that we were already funding through those taxes. So we're just going to have to come to you for more money. So we're going to continuously be in this cycle of being in a budget deficit, of them passing increased taxes to dig us out of the deficit because they don't want to cut spending at all. They want to continue to fund things like laser hair removal for transgender inmates. They want to continue to fund things like paying for legal fees for illegal immigrants, illegal aliens, all of these ideologically driven things. And you're going to bear the burden of that. And until people vote differently, then they're going to continue to do what they've always done. And why wouldn't they? And again, that's why I blame politicians, number 3. Number 2, the voters, for continuing to put these same people back in office and then complaining about what they do. And then number 1, of course, is the media. Because the media is supposed to be the watchdog for all of us. The media is supposed to be telling the truth about what's happening down there. And instead, you have ideologically driven entities like the Seattle Times editorial board that's coming out with all these editorials about Democrats need a budget better. They can't push through all these new taxes. Yet they just endorsed all these people for re-election. And they'll endorse all these people for re-election again in a couple years. So the media has absolutely zero credibility. And then the media on some of these insane bills that were pushed through use the captured language of the Democratic Party. They call, instead of rent control, what do they call it? Rent stabilization. Instead of reparations, what do they call it? The Covenant Home Ownership Program. Because that's what Democrats want them to say, because that makes it sound less bad. So it's the media's fault first and foremost. We would not be in this situation. Voters would not continue to vote the same way if they knew the true depth of absolute incompetence and irresponsibility that's happening in Olympia. And then, of course, the voters, you do bear some responsibility for this. Not you guys, of course. Not you. You know the voters I'm talking about. And then it's the politicians. Politicians are going to do what we let them get away with doing. So a couple things. Travis Couture, Representative Travis Couture, who's one of the budget leads for Republicans, he absolutely eviscerated them on the floor when this budget went to a vote.
We now will have a $78 billion budget that assumes the largest tax increases in state history. Taxes on the working class and the blue-collar folks spread across almost everywhere. The budget negligence of the past, where we once had a $15 billion surplus, but now face a $15 billion deficit, will be solved and balanced on the backs of hardworking Washingtonians. That's wrong. This budget assumes an 8% increase in reckless spending. An 8% increase in reckless spending. Taxing the joy right out of the state of Washington. This is not what Washingtonians want. We wanted a budget with no new taxes and to cut the wasteful spending. But instead, we gave more money to illegal immigrant health care and illegal immigrant legal services. And the only winners in this budget are politicians, bureaucrats, and criminals. Vote no.
Yeah, they voted yes, of course. And we'll have Representative Travis Couture joining us in a moment to talk in depth about who this budget is going to impact the most, the ways in which you're going to feel it and your family's going to feel it. I will disagree with him on one thing he said there, though. This is not what the people of Washington wanted. Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. And it's just like, we feel so stuck. I know you guys feel so stuck. I'm not leaving, though, so what's the choice? Just continue to try to point these things out. But these people didn't just wind up in Olympia for no reason. Voters sent them there. And I know it's frustrating because you have a lot of them that represent the Seattle area and don't represent the interests of a big swath of the state. And that's really frustrating, but elections have consequences. And so here we are. So here's the question. Is fiscal hawk Bob Ferguson going to stand in the way of all this? After all, in his inaugural address, what did he say? We need to take a hard look at how we got into this budget mess in the first place and make sure it never happens again. And then twice he slapped the hands of Democrats for bringing him too much in new taxes, sent them back to the drawing board, but they still came out at the end of the session in the final hours with $9.3 billion in new taxes. So if Bob Ferguson has meant what he said ever since he took office, that we can't push through all these new taxes, then surely he'd veto this thing, right? Surely he'd veto this thing. Instead, what is he doing? He's blaming Donald Trump. Finding a way to blame Donald Trump for this whole mess that the state finds itself in. So he sent out a couple tweets about what happens from here. So the first one, he said, we'll continue to work to ensure that we're protecting the most vulnerable in our state, as the Trump administration will doubtless continue its cuts and harmful economic policies. Maintaining our rainy day fund reserves will help us weather this storm. I'm not going to allow the state that I love to be at the financial mercy of Donald Trump and Elon Musk. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? I am not going to allow the state that I love to be at the financial mercy of Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Yet it's at the financial mercy of out-of-control Democrats, your party. The budget deficit, when was it announced that we had a $14 billion budget deficit? The day after the November election, before Donald Trump took office. Jay Inslee came out and said all of a sudden, we have a massive budget deficit. Of course, you wait for the day after the election because you don't want people to have consequences for the election. So nothing about the situation that we're in. This out-of-control spending started long before Donald Trump took office for his second term, and even before he was in office the first time around. Nothing about the situation we find ourselves in today can be attributed to Donald Trump or, what the hell, Elon Musk? Nothing. None of it. If anything, Elon Musk is actively trying to save us money so that we're not taxed so much at the federal level while we're taxed out of house, home, and everything else at the state level. That doesn't make any sense, Bob Ferguson. And he's like, oh, and this is true, they managed to push this budget through without tapping into the rainy day fund. And that's what he seems to be celebrating here and suggesting that we'll need that rainy day fund, not because Democrats have never met a tax or a spending line item they don't want to push through, but because Donald Trump's tariffs and his economic policy might devastate our economy. That's mental. So then he goes on to say that we won't really know his thoughts on the budget that was sent to him for a couple weeks. He said he's going to spend a couple weeks going through it, and then he'll have some announcement of whether he's going to sign it or veto aspects of it or whatever it is. He said, I want to thank our legislators, staff, and my team for all their hard work this session as we faced a $16 billion budget shortfall. I guess it's now 16. I don't know. It deepens every day. He said, I look forward to carefully reviewing the budgets line by line over the next few weeks. When that review is complete, I will share my thoughts with the public in greater detail. Beginning with my inaugural address, I've emphasized that we must use realistic revenue projections, preserve our rainy day fund reserves, find billions of dollars in savings and efficiencies, including a $100 million grant program for more law enforcement officers, increase investment in affordable housing, and increase the percentage of our budget devoted to K-12 education. The budgets adopted by the legislature accomplish those goals. So he supports the budget. After all the hand-wringing and fiscal responsibility, he's saying he supports $9.3 billion in new taxes, the largest ever tax increase in state history, and an 8% increase in spending. He went on to say, throughout this budget process, I have also insisted that the legislature take a balanced approach to solving the $16 billion shortfall. That is why I rejected an initial proposal to raise $21 billion in taxes. I then rejected a $12 billion tax proposal as unsustainable. And now what? $9.3 billion is suddenly sustainable? $12 billion? Way out of bounds. $9.3 billion, totally sustainable. He said, I appreciate the legislature heard my concerns and dramatically reduced the revenue assumed in the final budget. That's not a dramatic reduction. $12 billion to $9.3 billion, still the largest tax increase in state history, is not a dramatic reduction. He said, that said, I intend to carefully review all revenue increases. But there's only so much that he can do at this point. He can't go through and veto out certain lines. He can veto out entire tax proposals, but then he would send the budget into disarray and he'd have to call a special session. And maybe he intends to do that. But when he says the budget adopted by the legislature accomplishes his goals, tells me he's okay with it. So here we have a guy who fooled everyone, not everyone, but a majority of voters, into believing that he was a moderate and he was going to be fiscally responsible, gets elected, says the same thing over and over, and shame on me. I even celebrated him at certain points. It was like pitting him against the governor against legislative Democrats. I even put out a poll saying, whose side are you on, Bob Ferguson or legislative Democrats? Only come to find out they were on the same side the whole time. They were on the same team the whole time. So he's just going to sign off on all this. So Bob Ferguson, fiscal conservative, his legacy is going to be, and will always be, in the eyes of those of us with common sense and see things for what they are, signing the largest tax increase in state history into law his very first year in office, also signing an illegal reparations program that will cost us millions of dollars to defend in court, likely signing rent control, which will decimate our housing market, and so many other misguided policies. So any cloak he had of moderacy has been completely shed. You can't continue on as a moderate governor. You can't continue on as a fiscal hawk, a budget hawk, after signing the largest tax increase in state history into law in your very first year in office. Give me a break.